Hi everyone, welcome to Backer Breaks It Down. In this episode, we're going to work on congruent triangle proofs. I know, I'm super excited too. All right, so here's my advice when it comes to proving that two triangles are congruent. Of course, start with the given information. Okay, yes, you must include the given information in your proofs. My advice is to take it one given at a time. If it's a congruence given, mark your diagram. Also, make a side note next to the step in the proof, A for congruent angles, S for congruent sides. This is going to help us to see like when we have our three necessary congruences, and then we will know that we're ready to finish our proof. Okay. For any other givens, you want to draw a conclusion. Okay. You're probably going to be using a definition to draw that conclusion. Make sure you're referring to your reasons sheet. Okay. So you're keeping track of all of your known congruences. Remember, we need to have three of them to prove two triangles are congruent. So if you do not have three congruences, go to your look fors. Look for shared sides. Okay, because we can say that like a segment is congruent to itself using the reflexive property. Okay, another look for is vertical angles. Remember, whenever we want to use vertical angles in a proof, we have to first identify them, and our reason is assumed from the diagram, and then we can prove them to be congruent. Reason, vertical angles are congruent. And so once you have your three congruences, you are ready to prove that two triangles are congruent. Please be careful, because if you have two angles in one side, sorry about that, two angles in one side, you do want to like determine, is it angle side angle or angle angle side. Look at your diagram. You marked those congruences for a reason. And when you have two sides, why does it do that? Okay, yeah, awesome. When you have two sides in one angle, is it side angle side or is it HL? Because remember, HL, you have to have congruent right angles, congruent hypotenuse, congruent legs. And so that would be two sides in an angle. So that's something to, be careful of, okay? So are you ready? Yeah? No? Well, too bad, because we're going to write some proofs. All right, so here in this problem, we have given mn is congruent to pn. So I write it down in my two columns. I'm going to label my diagram, so mn and pn. And so what I notice is that those are sides of my two triangles. So I'm going to make a little side notation here with an S, indicating that I have a pair of congruent sides. Then I move on to my next given. Ray NO bisects angle MNP. So I'm going to write that down in my two-column proof. And then I need to draw a conclusion, because anytime they give us like a vocabulary term, in this case bisects, we should be drawing a conclusion, right? Now I'm going to highlight the angle that's been bisected. So we're talking angle MNP, and it's been bisected by the ray NO. So by highlighting the angle and the bisector, it kind of helps me to see what two angles are congruent according to the definition of bisects. And so now it's kind of like jumping out at me. These two angles here are congruent to each other because of bisects. So in step 3, I'm going to be naming a pair of congruent angles. And I'm going to say that angle MNO is congruent to angle PNO. And that's all because of the definition of bisects. So I've gone through all of my given information, and I have two congruences. Remember, you need 3 of them. So once you get through your given information and you're still short a congruence, look in your diagram. Look for shared sides, look for vertical angles. I have a shared side, right? So I'm going to say that NO is congruent to itself, and my reason is going to be reflexive. So now I'm ready to prove my two triangles are congruent, right? So I'm going to say that triangle MNO is congruent to triangle PNO. And if I look at my little side notations, this is suggesting side angle side. I can look at my diagram with all of its markings, and I can confirm that this is indeed side angle side. So let's try another one. In number 4 here, I'm given that angle B is congruent to angle E. So I'm going to mark my diagram. And in my 2-column proof, I'm going to, of course, write down that given info. And B and E, those are a pair of angles. Then I move on to my next given. C is the midpoint of AD. I write that down in my 2-column proof. When I'm given vocabulary, I need to draw a conclusion. Right? So I know that a midpoint will divide a segment into two congruent segments. So when I look at my diagram at AD, so here's A and here's D, that means that these two segments right here are going to be congruent. So now I've got a pair of sides, and I'm going to write that AC is congruent to DC, all because of the definition of midpoint. So I've gone through all of my given information, and I have 2 congruences, but I need 3. So that's when I go to my diagram and my look fors. I look for shared sides and or vertical angles. I see a pair of vertical angles right here. Okay. So remember, whenever you want to use vertical angles in your proof, you must first introduce them to the proof. So I'm going to say that angle BCA and angle ECD are vertical angles. And my reason is assumed from the diagram. And then I want to immediately follow that up with that they're congruent. So in step 5 here, I'm proving a pair of angles are congruent. So angle BCA is congruent to angle ECD because vertical angles are congruent. So because I've been making these little side notes, I see that I have my 3 congruences, and that's what I need in order to prove 2 triangles are congruent. So I can say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEC. The question is it angle side angle or angle angle side? So this is where me marking my diagram is going to help me to see which one it is. Okay, because I've got a pair of angles. That's nice, right? Got a pair of angles, another pair of angles, and a pair of sides. Notice that the 2 angles are not connected by that congruent side. So I'd be like angle, and then I'd have to jump angle side. So this would be angle angle side as to why the 2 triangles are congruent. Okay, let's try another one. So once again, I'm going to write down my givens one at a time. If it's a congruence, I'm going to mark my diagram, paying attention to congruent angles and sides of my 2 triangles. So I'm given that segment GH is congruent to GK, so I mark my diagram, and I realize that I have a pair of congruent sides. I move on to my next given, I write it down, It's a vocabulary given. It's perpendicular, right? And so according to the definition of perpendicular, when you have perpendicular segments, they're going to intersect and make right angles. So the question is, what are those right angles? So GJ is perpendicular to HK, so I get two right angles. So that's what I'm going to say in step 3. I'm going to say that angle GJH and angle GJK are right angles. And my reason for that is the definition of perpendicular. And because I just identified two right angles, I should also prove that they are congruent. So I can say that angle GJH is congruent to angle GJK. And this is a pair of angles. And my reason for that is that right angles are congruent. So I've gone through all the given information and I have two congruences, but I need 3 of them. So I go to my diagram and my look fors, and I look for shared sides or vertical angles. What do we've got here? Exactly, we have a pair of shared sides. So step 5, I'm going to say that GJ is congruent to itself. And what's the reason for that again? Yes, reflexive. So now that I have my 3 congruences, I am ready to prove that the 2 triangles are congruent. So I'm going to say that triangle GHJ is congruent to triangle GKJ. And what's our reason? Now be careful here, because our little side notations indicate that we have 2 sides and 1 pair of corresponding congruent angles. When you look at your diagram, is it side angle side? No, it's not. It's actually HL. Got your hypotenuse and your leg. Okay, and so that's why earlier I said be careful when is it side angle side or is it HL? Because our little side notations make it look like it's side angle side, but then when we look at our diagram, we realize, no, this is an HL situation. Okay, so be careful with that. Okay. And that's what I was mentioning down here. Okay, so just be careful when it comes to, I know 2 sides and 1 angle. Is it side angle side or is it HL? Likewise, when you know 2 angles in one side, is it angle side angle or angle angle side? Okay, but congruent triangle proofs. Always start with the given information. If it's a congruence given, mark your diagram. If it's a vocabulary given, draw a conclusion. If you do not have 3 congruences after you've done that, go to your diagram, look for shared sides and vertical angles. And then you're ready to prove your 2 triangles are congruent. And that's how Backer breaks it down.